Oh God, I wish I didn't need to take meds.
Flat out fucking auditory hallucinations.
I would literally wake up running from my bed.
I'm afraid that I'll pass my anger on to my son.
I thought the gunman was my father.
Afraid of not being able to make a living.
That's probably going to break his heart if he hears it, but that's the truth.
They committed him to Bellevue.
There was this fear that if I feel this pain,
I wish someone could see what was going on and just help me.
that it will kill me and I will die and I will drown.
You can't think your way out of a thinking problem.
And I cried the way that a baby cries. I cried like an animal.
It makes me so mad at myself that I do that.
The burden of perfectionism.
And that's when I got into therapy.
Let's talk about that.
So I was like, fuck it, I'm alive. I don't give a shit about anything.
You are a shining example of what is best about human beings.
I'm worried that the Russian militia is coming over the hill.
I know that, but Alice, how you feeling?
I'm pretty good. Pretty good.
Like,
Okay, so here we are, and I'm interviewing Paul Gilmartin, who's the pretty well-known by now host of the podcast, The Mental Illness Happy Hour. Started in 2011 and is still going strong. My name is Dawn Ring, and I'm from the Lane County, Oregon chapter of the National Alliance on Mental Illness, or NAMI. NAMI is a family-based grassroots organization that offers an amazing array of programs, support groups, and services for families and individuals suffering from mental illness. The mission of NAMI is to improve the quality of life of persons with mental disorders and their families through support, education, and advocacy. You can find out more about NAMI and its services in Lane County at namilane.org for the chapter in Lane County, Oregon, or NAMI.org to learn more about the chapter nearest you. NAMI's been a godsend to me and my family. My mom took several courses and seminars they offered on how to be supportive of a mentally ill child. And they even offer courses in setting up special needs trusts. Now in recovery, I'm currently enjoying doing interviews and book reviews for the quarterly newsletters. This is probably the most important part that I wanted to point out to you guys about NAMI is it's really unique in that at its core are volunteers who are survivors. So their understanding, unbelievable dedication, and compassion come from the fact that they've been through the hell that is mental illness. And I'm throwing addiction in there as well, of course. So we call this peer-to-peer philosophy. One of the reasons I'm so drawn to Paul and his podcast is for the same reason. Paul is a survivor, along with so many other things. Who better as a podcaster to understand and to have so much compassion for those of us who are in so much pain?
I fear that I'm inadequate.
So recently I've been punching myself a lot.
Sometimes I feel like my full-time job
mental illness
is convincing myself
I'm so alone.
Why
Hypervigilance.
I should try to do something.
I hate my kids seeing me like that.
I just imagine killing people.
I woke up with rats in my hair.
They warp reality.
Am I losing myself or am I becoming myself?
I go back to bed.
Hiding underneath the sofa while people were shooting outside the house.
I was able to get myself out of Scientology.
Put a gun to my mother's head and I was 11 years old.
And you just garbage moving from one person's house to the next person's house, and you just hope they don't throw you out like garbage.
So I planned my suicide.
Because you won't ask for help.
I'm asking for help. I'm not pretending everything's okay. I'm not trying to do it alone.
I'm really happy that I did it, because a lot of good things have happened since then.
That option just evaporated, and I'm not going to kill myself.
I don't think I have what the woman who is not right for me anyway wants.
Comedian Paul Gilmartin hosts a weekly audio podcast, The Mental Illness Happy Hour, consisting of interviews with artists, friends, listeners, and the occasional mental health professional, all about the battles in our heads. Those of you who listen are going to recognize the following: from medically diagnosed conditions, past traumas, and sexual dysfunction, to everyday compulsive negative thinking. It gets about, at the time I'm saying this, maybe more now, 600,000 downloads per month, has a 5 out of 5 iTunes rating, where it frequently occupies the top spot in self-help. It was also chosen by Esquire as one of the best podcasts of 2016 and is featured in the PBS documentary A New State of Mind. And just recently, Paul's podcast was nominated for a Stitcher Award. So pretty cool, huh?
Yeah. I feel very lucky.
Well, you're pretty awesome too. Okay, so let me say a little more about you before we get into the... Okay.
And by the way, you're doing amazing. You seriously could be on radio. You have a nice voice, and you were reading these things in such a natural way. It didn't even sound like you were reading them off a page. Why?
Because I feel it in my heart. I mean...
That makes sense.
It comes from the heart.
Yeah.
I'm doing it for the right reasons.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted you to know that you're doing great.
I was really nervous. So the show was introduced in 2011 and is certainly still going strong. It has brought peace to so many of us who suffer in silence. It helps our community feel more empowered and accepting of our illnesses, and perhaps most importantly, less alone. Paul is an extensive reader, excellent interviewer, and is able to regularly introduce fascinating themes that many of us wouldn't otherwise be familiar with. One example of a new, to me, fascinating theme that I have discovered from the podcast is the concept of covert incest. This type of abuse is much less understood and doesn't necessarily involve direct sexual contact, but can leave the same scars in the survivor. As a matter of fact, a couple of days ago when Paul was in San Francisco, I heard him say that he was put on this earth to try to explain this issue. Paul got his start in comedy and lives in LA, so it is time to extend the radius of familiarity with his work. It's just so important that we have a visceral and not only a passing intellectual understanding of the struggles of the mentally ill among us. And in my opinion, and in many people's opinion, this is what Paul's podcast offers. And I've got to go through a few of the fancy things said by fancy magazines here.
Okay.
So Atlantic Monthly says, praised by listeners all over the world. New York Times, a perversely safe place in which he and his guests can talk about their fears, addictions, and traumatic childhoods. Psychology Today says that the podcast normalizes, which means that it helps other people to realize there are other people struggling with what they have. It normalizes what so many others feel but are too fearful or ashamed to express. Remarkable. We're not done yet, guys. Esquire magazine says a vital, compassionate gem that fills a desperate and underaddressed need in our society. Slate magazine, I think this is the last one of magazines, says Gilmartin makes a conscious effort to explore stories that aren't black and white. And I guess covert incest falls right in there, doesn't it?
It really does.
Almost done here. We're ready to get to the interview. I just wanted to say from 1995 to 2011, Paul co-hosted TBS's Dinner and a Movie. He's been a stand-up comedian since 1987. His credits include Comedy Central Presents, Paul Gilmartin, numerous Bob and Tom albums, comedy festivals, The Late Show with Craig Ferguson, and I'm sure 15 more since I wrote this. Paul is a recovering alcoholic addict and has been sober since 2003, and he's also an incest survivor. He's been in treatment for depression since 1999, and he's a big believer in therapy and support groups.
I'm so scared of being alive and so scared of dying. I was so lonely, but I couldn't bear being around people, and it hurt.
I've just been very interested in dicks.
I don't know how to let loose and just be.
All my alters have different handwriting, different
Extremely anxious.
affects.
I am most turned on when I am in fear.
My first thought was I'm about to die.
Stomach clutching despair.
Ocean of sadness.
I came out over the phone to them.
I put myself on the Atkins diet in 4th grade.
They told me I was wrong.
The secrecy is what kills us.
And I just sat there and cried on his shoulder.
And it was the first time I ever felt safe, like a weight lifted off of me.
In order to get rid of your anger, you have to learn how to cry.
I started liking myself for the first time. I'm afraid that people are only nice to me because they're afraid I'll kill myself if they're not.
Oh, that's fantastic. That is fantastic.
Part 1, Mental Illness. I thought it would be nice to open with a quote directly from Paul, gleaned from the interview with Mike Corono, episode 65. At the heart of spirituality is the belief that there exists a kindness, or an energy, or a God, or a goodness or purpose that is connected to us. And we have to trust in doing the right thing and not acting out of selfishness and fear. So if we do things based on the right thing to do, which are going to make the planet a little bit better, as opposed to what is going on to enrich ourselves, that's where peace and joy come from. But the other illusion is so potent that our society and media are set up to make us worship recognition and wealth as something that will make us happy. But I can tell you, as someone who has done this other thing, and am trying to get meaning in my life, that this way has brought me more peace and joy than I ever could have imagined. But I forget it almost every day. Why don't you talk a little bit about what that last sentence means to you, Paul?
I don't know if it's because I am wired or have been, I hate to use the word brainwashed by the materialism that is so pervasive in our society, or like I said, it's just genetic in me. But I have so much fear running around in my brain, much less fear than I used to, but it always wants something that is immediate, clearly gratifying, and mostly has to do with me. I've found that to do the right thing, to be spiritual, to be of service, to be patient, sometimes is scary because I don't know what's going to happen. You know, what happens if I turn down that audition for a product, you know, to be the voiceover of a commercial product that I don't really believe in, right, but I'm worried about money. You know, is the universe gonna see that my rent is paid by turning it down and saying I don't want to?
No.
What I have found is when I do say no to the things, first of all, I usually get a sense of relief when I do the right thing. I heard somebody say one time, I know I've made the right decision when I feel peace afterwards. And that's when I remember. When I do the right thing, at least for me, I'm not saying somebody else doing an ad for a product I don't like is wrong. Just for me, when I do something that feels authentic to me, I feel peace. And I usually wind up okay. You know, things work out. I'm able to make the rent. So it's the fear that I battle. And I suppose the desire for shiny things. The desire
I think we all do in our own way. And if we don't admit that, we're probably not quite aware.
Yeah. Or the other end of the spectrum, which to me is not that much better, is the person who constantly lets you know that they are solely living on the alfalfa sprouts that they grow
Like
in their
PC.
desert hut, and that they, you understand what I'm saying, that, the person who has just taken it to the extreme where everything is the enemy and everybody's wrong and they are the only ones that see it right, and they want to lord that over you. That to me is just as corrosive as
yeah, well, that's not very peaceful either,
It's not.
Isn't part of peace being able to cohabit and
exactly
really work
but
to try to see the other person's point of view?
It is, and the ego is like a barnacle that will attach itself to everything. When I got sober and I began to live a more principled life, my ego began to attach itself to my spirituality. And I was like, holy shit, there is nothing it won't try to weasel in on. And so it takes vigilance for me. The ego is so uncomfortable being one of many. It wants to be either greater than or less than. And both of those things set you up to feel alone. And the most peace I feel is when I'm in a support group and I feel like I'm one of many on a common path, and my fears go away, and I remember that it is good to be one of many. It doesn't mean that you're not special in your own way. It just means that what you feel isn't unique. And that's what binds us all together. Hopefully.
Can you talk a little bit about what it was like when you weren't sober? You make mention of it a little bit in the previous quote I read, but
my ego was totally in charge, and it can still be in charge sometimes, but I'd like to think it's much less now. I was really only concerned about my own pleasure, my own looking good. I thought that the path to safety and a good future was that I needed to impress everybody, that would make me special. And it's exhausting trying to always be the best or to stand out. And that's not to say that doing a good job and getting recognition is a bad thing, but to get recognition as your goal is a really corrosive, sick way to live. And that's what I was doing. Because one, you don't have any control over how much recognition you get. And if you do try to control that, you usually wind up sacrificing principles that bring you peace. And that's what I was doing. I would blame people if I didn't feel like I was getting enough success. I didn't really think about who was the butt of my jokes. I was afraid to be vulnerable. I was defensive. I was emotionally withholding and cold to my wife.
Was this all because you drank, or were you drinking to try to get rid of these things?
I don't think I was conscious enough to know that I needed to get rid of them, because, one of the hallmarks of untreated addiction or alcoholism is you don't believe that you're the problem. You see it as you've been cursed with a life of problems and a group of people around you that just don't understand what they should be doing to make your life better.
I don't think that's any different from a mental illness person, though.
It's not. Addiction and mental illness are very much the same thing. It's really just maybe what...
where the source of the chemical
yes. processes
comes from, whether it's indigenous or from outside.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Maybe. I don't know.
No, there are some addictions that are external, like drugs and alcohol. You need to get generally out of your house to go get high. And then there are addictions that where the pharmacy is in your head. Maybe you're a compulsive flirter, or you are addicted to anger, or you're addicted to cutting, and the chemicals that are being released are in your brain and only require a process so you can access it 24 hours a day, but they're still the same. It's still all about escaping the feelings that you feel overwhelmed by. And I felt overwhelmed by so many emotions before I got sober because I couldn't see that I wasn't living a principled life and all I cared about was myself. I could care about you if it was convenient, and especially if I felt like I was going to look good. And I still have to be vigilant about that.
So you've really changed a lot. Oh my gosh.
I'd like to think that I have.
Yeah.
I still have a lot more work to do, but
well, we all do, though.
Yeah,
we all have a lot.
It never ends. But I like who I am today. You know? Yeah.
I'd like to read what for me was a really touching exchange between Paul and one of his guests, Jamie Franzo.
Mm-hmm. I
know he's one of your best friends, which I found it really touching. It's episode 90, and it's an interview with Jamie Franzo. So Paul asks, "What are you feeling right now?" And Jamie says, "In talking to you now, I feel a level of healing I've never experienced before, because I almost feel like I'm telling you something that I've witnessed rather than something I have endured. I feel a fullness in my acceptance of my trauma, that although my body was abused, they couldn't touch the best parts of me, nor can anyone on this day touch the best parts of me. That's something you volunteer. The beauty and the truth which have been shared by me and other victims and survivors is that although permanent damage is done to our bodies, it's our choice what we allow to be permanently damaged. What I've realized is that my story has helped another human being, even though their trauma may be different than mine. I'm helping them to really realize that they're not alone. So what do I feel? I feel grateful." And then Paul replies, just a brief reply, "I obviously haven't experienced anything even closely related to your trauma, but I have experienced what you're talking about when I realize that there's hope and my life isn't lost and there are other people there for me and recognize what I'm feeling and experiencing, and that feeling of being rescued is amazing. But to get to that place, you have to say, 'Please help me.' That is so hard if you haven't been taught how to do that, or you haven't had role models that ask for help."
Nice thing about having a horrible memory is you hear things for the first time.
What makes it even more poignant, huh?
It really does. I was like, wow.
It's like, he's articulate.
Yeah.
And it was amazing. His story is amazing. For anyone who hasn't listened to any episodes yet, that might be a great one to start with. It's
even just for the sound of his voice.
Oh.
Yeah.
He's amazing. I would love to meet him someday. I have another question, and this is one just mulling around in my head. It certainly has come up in my life and my family's life, but I struggle to understand the all too common life trajectory or the arc of a seriously mental ill person. It seems like it can take years or even decades to get a proper diagnosis, even from those coming from a stable, loving family, and they're trying their darndest to get that person what they need. This sort of ties in with what we were talking about earlier. Often during this time, the mentally ill person pushes away the help of well-meaning friends and family. Maybe they think they're not the problem, or maybe they're just too sick. But thoughts on why this is the case?
I think there's a variety of reasons. There's not education about it. You need education about something that is so complicated. I mean, even psychiatrists and therapists disagree about certain issues to do with mental health. And people in the neurology field or, biochemical field. We don't have definitive answers about so many things. So we have to talk about it. We have to talk about the fact that it's complicated, that something isn't going to be cured overnight. And many things can't be cured. They can only be managed. And even managing them has ups and downs, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And until you can set out from that place of knowing that, your expectations are going to be unrealistic. You're going to be frustrated. You might be blaming each other, the person that is trying to help, the person that is trying to get help or doesn't want help. And that's not even to mention the issues of enabling someone who doesn't want help. To me, there's a responsibility in taking care of your mental illness because it almost never just affects you. I get emails from people who say, I can't get my spouse to go see a psychiatrist. Well, I think even if there are children involved and this person is displaying an unacceptable behavior to you or your children, you should never take the option off the table of saying, if you don't get help, we are leaving because this is not acceptable. Where you can love that person is on their path as they try to get help because they really need it then, because it is frustrating and it does take a long time. 15 years into experimenting with different medications, I've finally found a combination that works for me.
May I ask what that is?
How much time do you have? Celexa, Buspar, Wellbutrin, Lamictal, and Adderall.
Okay. I remember at one point you were on the Adderall and you were pretty excited. So I guess you're still on that one. That's a keeper.
Yeah, it's not. I had resisted the offer to try it from my psychiatrist because he said, it people know of it as being used for ADHD.
It's speed.
Yeah, it is. It's an amphetamine. And he said, but it's also, it can be really effective for people with treatment-resistant depression, which is what he has classified that I have. And so I said no. I said, I'm in recovery and I don't want to screw around with a substance that is addictive to some people.
It's controlled?
Yeah, it's a controlled substance. And then I met somebody who was sober the same amount of time as I am, and she still is. And she said that she got so frustrated, she decided to take her psychiatrist's advice. And she said, I have no desire to take it other than prescribed, and it has been a game changer for me. So I said to my psychiatrist, okay, I'm going to try it. I'm tired of going back to bed 3 hours after I've woken up because the world feels like it's just too much. And he said, let's try 10 milligrams twice a day, then try 20 milligrams twice a day, and then try 30 milligrams twice a day and see which dosage feels right for you. And I did, and 30 felt like too much. 10 didn't feel like enough, and 20 felt just right. And so that's what I've been on. And it doesn't even occur to me to take more than prescribed. There's many times I don't take
Isn't our
the
brain
dosage.
Amazing? I take sometimes Klonopin. And unlike narcotics, which are the be-all, end-all, as far as I'm concerned, I'm not at all drawn to misuse it. It's amazing how our brains can be very specifically wired to a particular substance. Anyway, good for you.
Yeah, thanks. I just feel really, really lucky that I found it. And I just want to say to anybody who does have an addictive reaction to something, don't feel shame about that, because it's not your choice how your body reacts to a substance. But I think you do have a responsibility to yourself and people around you to try to deal with that addiction if
maybe
it's a problem.
Dealing with it would probably be speaking out in some way, telling someone, or going to a support group, or
first your psychiatrist.
Assuming you have one, and maybe a support group in there somewhere too to talk about it. Okay.
My psychiatrist refused to treat me until I got help for my drinking. He said, "I'm not going to take your money because you're wasting it."
Can you help us understand what support groups are?
There's a gazillion different kinds. There are some that are facilitated by a mental health professional. There are certain kinds that are self-funding and self-run. 12-step would be an example of that. And there's a gazillion different kinds of 12-step ones. There are ones like NAMI for where
they have their own set of support groups that are sort of in the peer philosophy, where there's a strong belief that if you've gone through it and are in recovery. This is a little spiel for NAMI, but it saved my life. So.
Yeah, I recommend NAMI to a lot of people.
Yeah.
And some there's a fee, some there's not. Some ask for a donation so they can, maybe pay the rent at the church that's letting them use a room. There's a whole variety.
And they're not all anonymous, right?
No.
And they're probably not all. I know some of them I've been in have had the rule, you can't be friends with anyone in this group, but they don't all have that either.
No.
They could conceivably be a way to find people of like mind who understand you.
The ones that I go to, friendship is encouraged with that. That's part of the healing for me, has been the intimate friendships.
That's what it seems like.
That
You've brought a fair number of your close friends onto the...
Jamie's an example of that. I met him through support groups.
Right.
Yeah.
I want to meet that guy. So let's see. I'll throw this in there too. We've sort of talked about therapy and medication, but why don't you go ahead and feel free to give your thoughts on how important it is. Are you a supporter of the therapy and medication, or do you advocate people sort of do their own thing? Or
well, I'm not going to try to tell anybody else what to do. I can tell you what worked for me and what my opinions are. And again, I'm not a mental health professional,
right?
But I am a hypochondriac, and that's got to count for something.
And you have Herbert.
And I have Herbert. That's my dog. I believe that
and you tell dick jokes.
And I tell dick jokes. I believe that you should give talk therapy a chance before making a decision about medication, because sometimes the talk therapy can be enough to ease the anxiety or whatever the issues are. A lot of the times, if not most of the time, it isn't enough to completely alleviate what the issue is: depression, anxiety, etc.
The talk therapy.
Yes, and it needs to be used in conjunction with medication. But that's each person's personal decision, because some meds there are side effects with. It's very hit and miss what works for you. Each person's a little different. So one med that may be a lifesaver for me is a nightmare for another person. So...
and the other thing about that is we change in time.
We do.
So if you have a good regimen for now, unfortunately, you can't count on that being 100% A-OK for the rest of your life.
Yes. And what my psychiatrist and I usually will do is something's starting to not work, we'll tweak the dosage. Or maybe we'll swap in one that's from a similar family of the one that we're removing.
My psychiatrist does that a lot.
Yeah. And I think it's important too to make changes one at a time, because then you'll know, oh, I'm feeling better or worse, probably because of this one change. In the past, I've made big changes sometimes at the same time, and then I don't know. Is it because I'm taking more vitamin D, or is it because I'm taking less of this med? But it's frustrating because it takes so long sometimes, for
weeks, if
not months, sometimes for something to change for the better. So self-compassion and patience. I'm a big believer in, when you feel like taking a nap, if you can take a nap, take a nap. It's one of the ways that I learned to be kind to myself, to not shame myself for going to bed 3 hours after I got up.
Okay. That's important to hear. I do the same thing. I shame myself.
I'm fortunate in that is no longer an issue for me, that I don't, I will take the occasional nap if, I've not been getting a lot of sleep, but since I added Adderall, I don't nap much during the day, and I am able to sleep when I lay down to sleep at night. And that is
amazing.
A godsend. It's a godsend.
Yeah.
It's a godsend.
Sleep is so important. It just seems like you're so busy with everything. I can't see how you would take a nap. I don't see how you would have the time. You seem to answer every single email.
I try, but as the podcast gets bigger, there are some days where I begin to feel overwhelmed, and I'll have to figure out what to do if the podcast keeps growing and I get to the point where I can't keep up. But I don't have to worry about that right now, because I learned in the past, sitting and basing how I feel today on what my crystal ball tells me is a big mistake. My crystal ball is broken.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, eloquently said, as usual.
My God, somebody does what I've been doing.
There's shame.
You have boundary issues.
I feel guilty for hating my mom.
I will be high by 4 p.m.
You feel helpless.
I will be in hell by 4:15.
Prison was not easy, but I deserved it.
I think I'm just addicted to lying.
I rubbed my body in mud and I laid in the swamp. Didn't move for 6 hours.
I looked forward to and dreaded each meal at the same time.
I think I desperately wanted to talk about it, but I didn't know how to start the conversation.
And that's when I called the suicide hotline.
A good Craigslist experience is if you are alive at the end of it. So
that is when I first felt love. Like I first felt
reaching out to the people and sharing with the other people.
This intimate connection where people do stuff for each other without wanting something in return.
Yeah, I surrendered.
I think I was 28, and that was the first time I ever experienced that, and it was amazing.
The second part of the interview, I called it the funny of mental illness. And basically that just consists of, you are a comedian, and a priori, why would a comedian and how would a comedian get into such dense, sometimes, mental health issues and such important life questions as is contained in this podcast? As are contained in this podcast?
I think it's actually makes complete sense to me. And I think any comic would probably agree, because most of us have demons. Most of us had some type of difficulty above the norm in childhood.
Really?
Oh, yeah. The most... I've yet to meet a really funny person whose needs were met as a child, or who didn't experience some type of trauma.
That might be one reason they go into comedy, is to try to just assuage that pain.
I think it's absolutely why.
Okay. Well, anyway, back to my question to you, which I diverted you. I'm sorry.
And I think there's a drive in most comedians to find the truth underneath the bullshit. And what truth could be more important to you than your truth? of who am I really? Am I contributing to the world, or am I draining it?
And again, that decision should be made by how we feel inside with our peace. It shouldn't be we're shamed into doing a particular thing, or we should do or shouldn't do, or have a memory of our mom saying, you should always do such and such.
Yeah. It should come from a place of principle, keeping in mind that you can't really help others until you have helped yourself, and make sure that you're giving from a place of abundance in your life and peace, rather than I'm afraid of looking bad, or I want to impress people, or if I don't go to this party, I'm a terrible person, but I'm so exhausted. That's where it would make much more sense that, yeah, your friend may be disappointed that you don't go, but if that friend's really your friend, they would understand that you're fucking exhausted and you're not going to enjoy yourself at that party. A big pivotal moment for me in my recovery was realizing that I should always have compassion for others, but not at the expense of compassion for myself. And that's kind of my guiding principle. And I think a lot of people in the helping professions don't know where to draw the line and to pull away and go recharge their battery, because they don't have the script in their head of how to say no, because they're afraid they're going to look selfish or bad, or they think it's up to them to save somebody.
Do you have it clear?
It's become much more clear, and I've gotten, I think, pretty good at setting boundaries and saying no in a way that is diplomatic and compassionate. But I still get anxiety when I have to say no. But it's very empowering to learn to say no and then not beat myself up for it.
That's something I have to work on. I'll try to.
It's hard. It's hard if you, especially if you were shamed for having needs as a kid.
I was, yeah.
Which
definitely.
Most people, I think, that struggle probably had some type of emotional invalidation in childhood, or at the very least, emotional neglect.
It almost seems that boundaries are involved in every single thing.
Every single thing. Where do I end and where do you begin? I didn't even know until I started going to my second support group, and I'm learning now that I'm getting really good at setting boundaries around how other people treat me, but I still need a lot of work on how I respect or sense other people's boundaries. And that's a hard thing to admit, but thank God I'm conscious of it and I'm willing to work on it.
These are not easy things.
Yeah, I think when you've got a streak of narcissism like I do, you assume the rest of the world views things the way you do, because you think about yourself so much.
I've got a question for you. Do you ever feel yourself thinking, oh, I'm so important because everyone loves me and everyone knows about me and all over the world people listen? Do you have to sort of struggle with staying centered and not feeling famous?
No. The biggest struggle that I feel is that people have unrealistic expectations about how, quote unquote, good of a person I am, because I get to see my flaws on a daily basis. I'll give you for instance, sometimes I'll be having a conversation with, and this was particularly true after I started to give weight to the covert abuse, sexual abuse I experienced as a kid. I would get a surge of adrenaline when I would share my story with a female who felt nurturing to me. But then sometimes it would trigger an inappropriate in me, because intimacy and sexuality, those wires were crossed in me as a kid, because they were presented to me in a loving way from my mom, some of the ways that she violated my boundaries. So when I begin to feel that warmth from a woman, and I feel like she could know all of me and not judge me, I want to tell her about all of me, and I want her to rescue me. And that's not somebody else's boundary. That's me putting my needs ahead of hers. That's not me considering what is it like for her to be in her shoes in this conversation. And so I've been inappropriate with women in the past by suddenly talking about things that in my mind was just a natural progression of our conversation, but in their mind, I was asking questions that were way too personal of them, or I was sharing things that were way too much information for them. But now I'm becoming aware of it when my adrenaline starts spiking in a conversation with a woman who feels nurturing and safe and warm to me. I have to be aware that my addictive side is being triggered. So I'm afraid that somebody will look at that and say, oh, he's a fucking hypocrite. You know, he talks about how we can become better people and what to strive for and what is mentally healthy on the show. But here he is being inappropriate in a conversation with a woman.
You are so hard on yourself.
That's what my very first therapist said to me when I was 25 years old. And I know that intellectually, but when you see that you have made somebody else uncomfortable or made them feel disrespected or objectified, it is a really hard thing to reconcile inside of yourself, even if you have the long-term goal of becoming better at these issues.
You really care about this issue a lot, don't you, in yourself?
I think I do. I think I do.
It comes across that way. This is sort of a nice segue into, I wanted to ask you, and I have an idea what you might say, but are there any particular issues in this area that are particularly interesting or engaging or captivating to you at this time?
In what subject?
Well, I was sort of goading you to talk a little bit about covert incest because you certainly, I don't want to say attacking it with a vengeance because that's absolutely the wrong analogy, but
I'm on a mission to shine a light on it. There's no doubt about that, and especially when the perpetrator is a mother or a female.
I know you know a ton about it, but would you consider giving us sort of an encapsulated view of what it is? Because it's really, I mean, I got Silently Seduced, which is the book that you recommend people look at. And, you know, I don't consider myself a dumb person, but it seems like you really have to hold a lot of dichotomies in your head.
A lot.
To try to understand this issue.
It's really hard.
Would you be willing to?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Again, I'm not a mental health professional, and this is just me paraphrasing some of the hallmarks of covert incest is, like you said in the beginning of the podcast, there isn't overt contact with the child. Very often it's emotional, treating that child as your spouse, putting your needs, your emotional needs ahead of the child's. For instance, the parent who says to their child, I'm really lonely and sad. Could we go cuddle in bed? That child may even feel honored as a child to have that parent ask them that. But when they get older and they become their parents' age, and they look at that child, it suddenly hits them how incredibly inappropriate that is. That is too heavy of a thing to lay on a kid. And then that kid is aware that, oh, my parent is emotionally fragile. I need to care for them. And that fucks a kid up.
So that's sort of the second.
That's one of the ways. The way you look at your child can fuck them up.
You mean even just a glance?
No, not a glance. Drinking them in with your eyes. Kids know when the parent is looking at them. Sometimes lustfully, sometimes examining them in a way that feels intrusive.
Even with all their clothes on?
Yes, even without commenting on, boy, your breasts are really looking great. My mom would pinch my butt a lot and tell me how handsome I was. And I let her do it because I had become accustomed to letting her have her way, because she had always presented herself as emotionally fragile. She had always looked to me to fill the gaps that my father couldn't fill because he was a withdrawn alcoholic. And I liked making her happy, but it took a toll on me. It affected my view of women. I think I had a lot of anger. Another way that covert incest can happen is not allowing children to have privacy or autonomy over their bodies, not allowing them to be in the bathroom alone, calling them into the bathroom when you're in there, despite them saying, I'm uncomfortable with that, bathing them beyond an age where they can bathe themselves, doing things, motherly or fatherly duties in a way. For instance, my mom took my temperature rectally till I was 8 years old.
That's pretty extreme.
Yeah, and I always felt. I remember feeling around 6 or so that this doesn't feel right. It feels like I'm being tricked, and then pushing
tricked.
Yes. And I remember pushing that out of my mind and didn't give weight to it until, a couple of years ago. That's a form of covert incest. Some might even say overt incest because she's inserting something that doesn't need to be inserted into me.
Where does the tricked part come in?
I asked her, why do we still do it this way? And she said, because I'm afraid you're going to bite down on the thermometer.
There you go. Okay.
And there was just a vibe where I felt kids can pick up on things. Mm-hmm. Barging in on your children when they're changing, when it clearly makes them uncomfortable. And the phrase I always hear that the abusing parent will justify it is saying, I'm your parent. I made you. Or I'm just your parent. My mom used to say, oh, I saw it before you ever did. And so she would shame me for wanting to have privacy, for wanting to...
It's almost like she's shaming you for having an asshole.
Yeah.
It's almost what it sounds like.
Yeah. It was... none of these things were on my radar as inappropriate. And the bathtub is where a lot of stuff happens to kids who experience covert incest. A lot of mothers walking around the house naked despite it making the children uncomfortable. Nudity in and of itself is not a bad thing, but it depends on the appropriateness of the other parties involved, what the intent of the person who is walking around naked is, whether they are conscious of it or not. And a lot of covert incest, I think, was probably perpetrated on the parent who is turning around and doing it again, and they don't know. Some of them may. I don't know. I would love to know deep down what my mother's motives were, but She has her own reality, and I have my own reality, and they don't overlap, and I have had to accept that I will never get an answer to that. Certainly not one that I 100% believe in. And I don't need to get that answer to begin healing. I need to answer my own questions, which is, do I feel safe? No. Then don't have contact with her.
Yeah, wow.
So those are some of the hallmarks of covert incest, but I'm sure a therapist or an expert in this field would be able to share more. Or
do you think all of them? I'm not completely sure that all the therapists are really.
Oh no, there are some that are fucking clueless.
Right.
About
it. That's part of the reason you're so sort of diligent about this issue. Yeah.
But then there are other ones who are just brilliant and helpful. Ken Adams, who wrote Silently Seduced. That book changed my life. The therapists I've had have changed my life. Because the other thing that survivors struggle with is the voice that protected you as a child because you were trapped said, you're making this up. This is not a big deal. And if you are aroused or thinking this, you're dirty.
That's why sexual abuse is just particularly insidious and so much more complicated, perhaps.
It is, because it can feel good, but your body and your soul and your body can be experiencing two completely different things at the same time. One time I was in the bathtub at an age I should not have been naked. I was like 12, and she wasn't giving me a bath, but she was working on some gravel in my knee. I didn't need to be in the bath. I didn't need to be naked.
Oh, my goodness.
And I got an erection, and for years I blamed myself. And it wasn't until enough therapists have told me, you shouldn't have been in that situation. It was unnecessary, and your body responded. That wasn't...
Isn't it amazing how much denial we can have over things that happen to us? Because as you tell me that story, it sounds horrifying, but to you, for so many years, it didn't even occur to you that was inappropriate.
My brain will still tell me. There's a portion of my brain that still rolls its eyes at me and says, you baby, you exaggerator, here we go again. You are a real piece of work. Look at you trying to get attention. That voice will probably always be in my head, but it has gotten much more quiet, and the healed part of my brain has gotten louder. And that to me is one of the best things about starting to heal.
And again, the components of being able to heal would be finding a good talk therapist,
learning non-sexual intimacy with people. If you're in a relationship, I would say learning non-sexual intimacy with that partner and communication, so then your sexuality with each other can come from that place of emotional connection and not from a place of you're both in your head fantasizing about different things and afraid to share that fantasy with that other person. That's just one example. Your fantasies can bring you together with somebody, because if you can share something you're ashamed of, and we're talking about a fantasy where you're in reality not going to hurt anybody.
Of course.
And both partners are consenting, it can really bring you together, because you can build trust when you share something like, oh my God, I'm so ashamed, but I, want to wear a skipper's hat and be spanked on a boat. If that other person says, fuck, let's go rent a boat this weekend, that can bring you closer together.
Yeah. You have these oh, I know. What kinds of things would someone find on your website if they found their way there, and what's the web address?
There's mentalpod.com, mentalpod.com. There's a forum you can join. There's a gazillion different threads there, a lot of really supportive people. There are blogs by me outside the forum. There's blogs, guest blogs. You can support the show. We could always use more financial help. There's transcripts of episodes, and there's about 300, as of right now, about 320 episodes of the podcast up. It's a little tough to navigate it. We're hoping to update our player and our navigation sometime in the near future. But again, not having a great budget, I can't.
And you didn't mention your surveys, which are one of the most powerful parts, because in each episode, usually towards the back end of it, you go through and read
these anonymous surveys where people...
Seems like every single one that is sent to you for that week, or the highlights of them often.
I can't keep up with the number of surveys that people fill out. Some of them I can. The happy moments, the awfulsome moments, I'm able to keep up with those.
Define awfulsome for us, for some of those
Something
people.
that was awful at the time, but in hindsight, there was something funny or beautiful about it, i.e. awesome. So awful and awesome.
All right.
Awesome and awful.
And those are two of your surveys.
That I rely on pretty much every week. The other two that I'm able to keep up with is female sexually violating a male and babysitter survey. But the ones I'm way behind on, because so many people fill them out, but they're a hallmark of the podcast, is the shame and secrets survey. And that's where you really hear people share the stuff that they were going to take to the grave. And that's where I've learned the most about people, their trauma, their sexual fantasies, things they've done, things they think about, things they would like to say to somebody.
Do you feel that it helps them to have that release, to write down the things on those?
Yeah, many people will type, "I'm crying" now as I type this. This is the first time I've ever consciously formed this sentence. I'm shaking.
How does that make you feel when you read it?
I want to reach through the computer and hug them to give them comfort. I'm glad that I provided a outlet for them to give weight to what they're feeling or thinking. And I'm really happy that somebody listening to me read that might say, you know what, I think it's time I went to therapy because I identify with that. And I've never said some of the things that I think about all the time.
Do you think that any of the people have ever had their lives saved by writing down and getting that release and maybe losing a little bit of the shame over it?
I do. I have gotten emails from people saying that they heard a particular episode of the podcast and changed their mind about taking their lives. And it's, the low self-esteem part of me wants to write that off and say, don't get a big head, fuckface, don't take credit for what the universe is just doing through you. That's actually what I believe, is that the universe is doing this through me. And if I'm going to take any credit, it's for being able to put my ego aside for 2 hours to let the universe work through me.
Really?
Yeah. And that I have been blessed with the combination of obstacles and healing so that I have purpose in life to share what I've been through and where I'm at so that it can inspire other people. So whereas I used to see it as a curse, I now see it as a blessing, like I won the lottery. Like I won the lottery, because as I was telling you, as we were coming up here to record, it's so nice not questioning what it is that I do for a living. There's tremendous peace around feeling like this is where I'm supposed to be. And I just hope I don't fuck it up.
You're not fucking it up. Not at all. What are your dreams and your hopes? Where would you like to see this podcast go?
honestly, I'm living it. I'm living it right now.
So you're there. You're in the present. You're not.
I'm in the present. Anything that, I suppose, that for it to reach more people and for there to be more people realizing that it's okay to ask for help and that they're not alone. Where does it say our battery is at? Should be up here.
Let's see here. It's at 21%.
Okay. We got a little bit of time.
We got a little bit, yeah. At this point, I don't need this anyway.
Yeah. I love my life. I love that I have found, I'm lucky enough that my day-to-day needs, non-emotional needs, are being met. And that I have found a system of support that my emotional needs are being met. And if they're not, I know how to try to get them met in a way that is hopefully healthy and appropriate. Because there were many years when I went about trying to meet my emotional needs in the wrong way. And it's nice to have the right tool for the right job, be it picking up a telephone to say, hey, man, or you got a minute? I really need to get something off my chest, or I need a different, perspective on this thing because I'm kind of confused, et cetera, et cetera.
I think I just have a couple more. Okay. You defined awfulsome already. One I wanted to ask is, who do you think benefits most, your listeners or you?
I think we both do. Yeah, there's no question. I think it helped me heal from the covert sexual abuse I experienced. The moms that are listeners just circled the wagons for me. I was so second-guessing what I said because I thought, I always fear that somebody is going to tell me that I'm wrong and I should just shut up. And with something that personal, I was just really worried about how people were going to listen to it and perceive me. And so many moms emailed me and said, I am so sorry that you experienced that. I'm a mother, and what you went through is fucked up and wrong.
So you got a lot of validation.
Oh, my God.
That is wonderful.
Oh, my God. You can edit this out if you want, but one of the things I was most touched by in a fucked up way was a mom wrote, I want to kick your mom in the cunt. And I certainly don't advocate that, but I was touched. And I don't want that to happen to my mom.
She's 83 or something, right?
88.
88.
I wouldn't want anybody to do that to any person. I wouldn't want anybody to do that to my mom. But the anger that mom had, her protectiveness towards me, really moved me.
Have you ever met any of these?
Oh, I have, yeah.
Had them on...
I've cried on quite a few shoulders. And moms that are in my support groups. And guys that are in my support groups.
That's what saved you.
It did. And continues to.
I guess, really, for the members of NAMI, Lane County, or NAMI in general, as far as, I guess what I would hope, we all want to have sort of be sister organizations and really try to connect as much as possible and fill in the holes. So, what would you say?
Asking for help and offering help are the two most important things I've discovered in my life. And everybody feels emotionally overwhelmed. That's what unites us all. Maybe not all at the same time, but we all know what it's like. And there are a lot of people out there who don't have the capacity to empathize with you. don't take it, don't let them represent the rest of the world to you.
Keep trying until you
Keep trying, because there are so many empathetic people who will help you. And you will find one of them if you keep seeking. You will. You absolutely will. And you'll get better at sensing who is safe to open up to. You'll get better at sensing the difference between helping and enabling. You get better at sensing asking for help and maybe relying too much on one person and beginning to drain them. But you will never know all of those things until you do it, just like playing a guitar or anything else. You just have to start doing it. And nobody does it perfectly. Nobody does it gracefully. And don't take yourself too seriously. Take your illness seriously, but don't take yourself too seriously.
Thank you, Paul, for your time.
Thank you, Dawn.